Hello, and welcome to the second lesson and the technical writing unit that I've kind of thrown together for my high school engineering class during this distance learning period. And the first lesson was just an introduction to technical writing and what it is and what kind of documents encompass technical writing. This second lesson is actually delving into how you technical write, the formatting, the styles you see in industry, depending on what kind of documents you are writing and where you're sending them to and who you're communicating to. So it'll be kind of a similar format as last time, but we'll be getting a little deeper into the content. So first and foremost, so what does writing technically really mean? So last lesson we talked about how technical writing is breaking down information in a technical manner and communicating it to people that either have the technical knowledge, the same experience you do, or something completely different. They have, no idea of the terms and the technical nature of your field. So aside from that, we're going to start building on it. It's often taught that with technical writing, it's a more efficient, effective, and matter-of-fact type of communication, which is nice. In my high school English class, I had an English teacher, and he would say, when you write your essays, don't add fluff. Don't put fluff in. And what he meant by that was when you're trying to write essays, oftentimes, whether it's like a 5-paragraph essay or a research paper or something like that, you feel kind of pressured to make it as long as possible to satisfy requirements, right? It has to be at least 5 pages long and needs at least these many sources and things like that. With technical writing, it's not like that. In fact, the goal is to write as little as possible without losing any meaning, which is great. So I have a couple of examples here. For the sense that it's more of a matter of fact, straightforward sense of writing, you want to break down words from a more complicated stance to more simplified, right? There's no need to use fancy words just to make yourself sound smart or to make your document or communication seem more esteemed. You're trying to communicate as clearly as possible. So I have this table right here at the bottom left, and it has examples of what they call showy words, right? Commence, right? Why say commence when you can just say the more straightforward version of start? Or to fabricate, right? Showy word. Straightforward, make. You could just say make, right? And so people of all backgrounds, education, technical fields, they're going to have a much higher chance of understanding what you're trying to communicate to them. So building on that, something else you typically do when you technical write is you try to reduce the amount of words that you use, and then in essence, the wordiness of paragraphs and sentences and phrases and stuff like that. You're trying to reduce and eliminate any potential for confusion, right? So over here at the right table, there are certain phrases that are under the wordy category and then a more efficient way of saying it. So instead of saying something like a large number of, you can just say many. Or in close proximity to, you can just say near or nearby. So you don't need to draw out your sentences, your paragraphs, your documents with all these unnecessary words, all these fancy words that just really get in the way and potentially confuse your reader. So on top of that, we want to talk about the balance between word reduction and detail, because as I was saying earlier, we are trying to write as little as possible in one sense, but at the same time, it's not like we are trying to we're only trying to reduce the amount of words we use, because we also don't want to lose the detail in what we are trying to communicate, right? We have some examples here of wordy type statements and then a more concise type statement as sort of examples. So the first one, it is essential that the lens be cleaned at frequent intervals on a regular basis as is delineated in Ops Procedure 132C. Very wordy, right? There must be a way to reduce that down without losing any detail. Concise version, clean the lens frequently and regularly. See Ops Procedure 132C. So when we converted it to this more concise statement, we did take away words and reduce the wordiness of the phrase or the sentence, but we also didn't sacrifice anything of substance, right? We didn't take away any necessary details that would give the reader or the person you're trying to communicate with less detail than they need to know for whatever you're trying to tell them, right? Okay, next. So in terms of sentence structure and how to structure sentences across a variety of documents, there's a few things that you want to look at. And number one is redundancy. Okay, well, in essence, you're trying to make things as not or as least redundant as possible. Redundancy, for those of you that don't, it's been a while, you don't really know what redundancy is. It's kind of like saying the same thing more than once. It's kind of like throwing words on top of each other or putting words together that really don't add anything. They're just saying the same thing over and over again. So, for instance, there are examples right here. Completely finish. Why add the adverb completely in front of finish when you just finish something? You're saying the same thing by saying completely finish and finish. Or what's another one on here? Transportation vehicle at the bottom set of words. Well, all vehicles are they transport in nature, right? So adding the word transportation to vehicle really isn't going to add anything. It's redundant. It's unnecessary. It doesn't add anything. It just kind of adds more words unnecessarily. So you want to try to remove all kind of redundancy that you might have in your sentence structure. Next, using the unnecessary passive voice. So we have some examples here. And for instance, the first one, passive voice problem. Control of the flow is provided by, whereas when we want to revise it, we're going to change it to a DJ12 valve controls the flow. Okay, unnecessary words. Right there. We have the word provided with the suffix id, implying the past. Right. So it's passive voice. So we want to try avoiding all that stuff. And it's for the same reason as everything else. We're trying to reduce confusion. We're trying to reduce wordiness. We're trying to write more efficiently, right? There are some good uses to the passive voice when it comes to writing. And keep in mind, this is, again, for technical writing. It's not like you want to do this in your English class or, other types of literature. But some good uses in technical writing. We have some examples down here. Electricity was discovered thousands of years ago, or the bridge was torn down in 1992. You have to use the passive voice in describing what exactly those sentences are trying to say, right? It's something that happened in the past. And so by nature, you're going to be using the past tense to describe them. Whereas if you go to the examples up here, you don't really have to do that stuff, right? It's talking about things in the present instead of in the past. So the grammar should reflect that. Okay, the third thing about sentence structure is the camouflaged subjects and verbs. So oftentimes when you're adding all of these words in there and you structure sentences a certain way, sometimes the subjects and the verbs kind of get clouded in there and it muddles up the meaning. So for instance, we have our first sentence here, camouflage subject, the subject of a sentence. Complaints by employees being the subject, about the food served in the company's cafeteria have been frequent. Okay, so we have employees kind of in the middle of the sentence there. The attention is kind of diverted away from it and towards words and details that aren't really needed. So we go down to the revision, and it has employees have frequently complained about the food served in the company criteria. So it has employees at the beginning of the sentence, so there's more emphasis on it. There's more visibility on it, so it's not as muddled or clouded, right? So this is something you really want to look to when you are doing technical writing to make sure things are very clearly stated. The fourth one is unnecessary expletives. So we have here in our first example, we have weak expletives. It is, there are, there were, right? Whereas when we revise them, we take all that stuff out. Again, we're trying to reduce the amount of words. There are different ways to say, it is the results of studies. We can just say results of studies. They're unnecessary. You don't need them. They fluff up your sentences. You want to reduce as many words as possible in these things. Lastly is noun stacks. Noun stacks are just when you shove a bunch of nouns together, one after the other. It kind of goes hand in hand with redundancy. It's just adding nouns all together to try to make something seem longer than it is, but you're really not adding much substance to it. So the noun stack they give you is the combustion chamber exit gas temperatures are approximately 2400 degrees Fahrenheit. So that whole phrase right there, that whole term, combustion chamber exit gas chambers, that would be a great example of noun stacks, right? That would be approximately 4, depending on your count, right? You go to the next one. The temperature of gas exiting the combustion chamber is about 2400 degrees. So you don't have all those nouns stacked on top of each other, muddling up everything. Everything breathes a little easier. It flows nicer when you say it out loud, when you say it in your head. You got to imagine the reader, you're trying to communicate to, right? Okay, next, facts over opinion. So, of course, as you'd expect, you want to use facts more than opinion, and what that means is facts is something you state, right? It's true, and it's something you state. It's very clear, matter of fact, right? So the example they give here is the NR48 tool features multiple programmable transmitters and a 5-station receiver array. And that's true, right? That's not something you can dispute. It's truth, and it's clearly stated. Whereas an opinion of that version of that would be the NR48 is by far the best piece of equipment for our purposes. And the problem you have with opinions is not only is it something that cannot be proven, is they're often used as a way to maybe bolster something like a product or a feature or some idea without giving any kind of evidence. So there's no backup here. All it says is that it's the best type of equipment, but it doesn't explain how. So it doesn't really tell you anything. It doesn't give you anything that would help at all, right? Everyone has a different idea of what the best piece of equipment means. Next, logically structuring content. So depending on the type of document you're writing and who you're writing it to, there are different ways you want to structure a technical document. Okay, the first one that a lot of you makes a lot of sense is chronological organization, meaning by time, right? Chrono, the prefix chrono means time. If you ever play the game Chrono Trigger, for instance. And so it's just it's a progression. For instance, with an instruction manual, it's just progression of step 1, step 2, step 3. It's or if you're recounting something, maybe a report of a lab or a study that was done, you're recounting things as they happen in time, forward in time. So that's going to be chronological order. A descriptive organization, you're going to separate your document by descriptions for different areas. For this example here, they say they have a description for equipment or facilities, and then it moves on to another physical point in that area. Okay, so it's almost like subject matter. You're going to move from here to here to here. Organization by order of importance, same thing. So the things that the reader deems most important, that's most applicable to them, the information they need to know the most or the quickest, you probably want to put ahead. People, at least in America, read documents from the top down. And so you want to you could, if you're going to organize in this manner, depending on what kind of document you use and who you're talking to, you're going to want to put more important information up top. And so people don't have to dig around for it, right? Resumes are a very good example for this. At the top of resumes, you typically want contact information, your education and stuff that can be stated very clearly at the top. Because when you're applying for a job, typically they're going to have minimums for things like education. If you're doing internships, maybe a grade point average, a GPA. And so you want to state that in your name, everything up top very clearly, because that's going to be the first thing they want to see. Then if you kind of pass that gate of, they have the education, there's contact information here, then they read through the substance of your resume, right? The essence of your experience. Okay, and then from there they go back and then they contact you. That'd be an example of order of importance. Organization by level of difficulty. Perhaps your material needs to be presented in order of familiarity or difficulty, as when you are writing a tutorial or textbook. So you guys have obviously read a lot of textbooks before. So information is, especially like in math, is organized in a manner where it starts simple and it gets harder, or maybe they group on difficulty. So The hardest difficulty is first or maybe in the middle, and then you have another set of problems as a different kind of difficulty. And so there are some instances like textbooks or tutorials where you want to group things by how complicated or how difficult it's going to be for the reader to work through it, just so you have all the simple stuff together, they can get through it quickly. You have all the difficult stuff together so they know what they're getting themselves into, and they can, I guess, mentally prepare themselves for it. Lastly, general to specific organization. So moving from the general to the specific is useful as in a memo that starts with stringent safety regulations and then provides examples of current unsafe practices. So yeah, that in itself is a good example. In technical documents, you're often going to have a kind of introduction, whether it's for a proposal or for a instruction manual. The resume, you can kind of see how you might have like an introduction type thing. You're going to start with very general information that gives you an idea of what the reader is getting themselves into, what to expect from what they're going to be reading. And then after they get into that general description of what's going on, then they go into the more specific pieces. Okay. All right, formatting for accessibility. So when it comes to accessibility, you want the reader to have as comfortable time reading your technical document as possible. You don't want them to have to squint or have to reread several things. You want the document to flow. You want the document to breathe. Accessibility in this case means it being able to be read, your document being able to be read or communicated to the widest audience possible. You want as many people as possible to have the easiest time as possible reading it. Okay, that's what accessibility means in this case. So with hierarchical headings, when you organize information in a hierarchical setting, so top to bottom or bottom to top, typically top to bottom. Right here I have an example at the bottom. We have the first level, the second level, third level, fourth level headings, and so they give you an idea of not only the information heading down in a hierarchical manner, but they also, depending on the font and everything, the larger font and maybe the descriptions that they're going over, they actually tell you what is being gone over in that section. So, for instance, the first level 1.0 quality assurance provisions, because it's 1.0 and it's not the rest of them, and the indent is at the very left side, and it's generally pretty short, you can probably suspect that that's going to be more of the introduction or more of the highest level of your organized information. And then once you work your way down 1.1, 1.11, you get an idea of what kind of information is being presented to you based off of how it's organized in your essay. Let's see, bulleted and numbered lists, same type of idea. You have, and you see, I do a lot of bulleted stuff. It's a lot easier to read information or to scan through information when it's in a bulleted or numbered format compared to when it's a paragraph. And you can see that in the bottom left right here, just without even reading any of the words. Immediately, if you had to choose between reading the top paragraph and the lower list of the bulleted view, the bulleted view is immediately more appealing to your eye because there's more space between all of the sentences. It's sequential, so it goes from 1 to 2 to 3, and so it's the brain likes order. And you don't have to dig through a paragraph to find a specific piece of information. You know which number it is. So it's making it more comfortable for the reader to read in that case. And checklists, I use checklists for my class, right, for the assignments at the during all the units we do. And I like that format a lot just because it separates maybe a large set of requirements into single lines, so it's a lot easier to keep track of what exactly you have to do. It's just very aesthetically pleasing to the eye. And then you want to look at paragraph length and structure. This kind of goes with the last two for accessibility. Over here on the left, we see a report, and it's blurred out on purpose, that clearly very long. The paragraphs are very long. Immediately you look at that and go, ugh, I don't want to read that. And all the power to you. I don't want to read it either. And when you have not only just a document, but maybe a document with a lot of pages, like a report with paragraphs just like that, you're kind of discouraging the reader from reading it. They don't really want to read that, right? They look at that and go, ugh. You don't want to do that. And so you can structure your paragraphs in a certain way, or your documents in a certain way, to where the reader is going to be a little more willing to read what you're trying to communicate to them. So on the left side, again, we have very long paragraphs. It looks pretty wordy. On the right side, look at this. We have the top, we have our title. Right under that, we have a paragraph. It's only a few sentences long. And then we have a space. And then we have our next paragraph, a couple sentences long. And then we go down, larger paragraph, and then paragraphs under each of the numbered lists, or each number, right? It's a number of the list. So you have 1, 2, 3, and 4. Each sentence or phrase or paragraph is listed under that. And that document looks a lot more aesthetically pleasing, and it puts a lot less stress on the reader to read. You can probably admit, looking at this document, you much rather read this one than the one over here, just because it flows a lot nicer. And you can also see that the numbers and then some words here and there, and maybe the titles, they're all bolded, right? So it adds a little bit of variety, and it really shows you, or it really emphasizes certain information above others to give you exactly what you need right away. So you don't have to dig through a giant set of paragraphs like the one on the left. So that document is formatted very nicely for accessibility. Okay, now formatting pages. Typically, and again, it'll differentiate depending on whether you're in school or in the real world or what kind of document you do. But these are the typical, qualifications or specifications for how you want to format pages in your technical document. And a lot of them are, not going to be too different from what you're doing already in Google Docs and stuff like that. So first, your margins, the margins of your page. So the frame of your page where there's no writing or anything whatsoever on your computer. 1-inch margin all around the page. That's pretty typical, and that way it looks just more natural, right? You don't want words writing right up against the sides, but you don't want to waste too much space. Fonts. So there's a few different fonts you might want to look at. First, the serif type of fonts, like the New Roman font, is really good for bodies of text. So if you're writing instruction manuals or recommendation report or proposal, the body, the meat of that document, typically needs to be in something like a Times New Roman font, just because it's a little easier to read on the eye. Sans serif type fonts like the Arial font that I think Google Docs as of right now, that's their standard one, is really good for titles and headings. So it's perfectly fine to have different fonts for titles, headings, and for bodies. It's just they do that in a way that method is good, just so people are more inclined to have a comfortable time reading the documents. Okay, because titles and headings are usually bigger. The Arial type font, it does a pretty good job. Plus, it looks nice when it's bigger in the heading format and less formal when it's in the body. And then lastly, variation between the body text and everything else as outlined above. And so you can, depending on which ones you use, you can vary the text you use in the body. Typically not so much with the body, but with titles, you can change the fonts here and there. I would stick with the sans serif type fonts like Arial, and then other fonts, maybe Calibri, and those are fine. You can kind of change them here and there. You can italicize, you can bold, just whatever your document, you feel like your document needs. The size of the letters typically is going to be 10 to 12. I've always been told 12. Maybe depending on different documents, it might be easier to have a little smaller font and of course on the kind of font you do have. But I would gear towards 12, but font 10 to 12. Of course, anything lower than 10 is too small. Anything larger than 12 is you're just wasting space. It's not really needed, right? Titles are always going to be larger than the body text. And then lastly, for capitalization, and I'm talking about capitalization kind of in the unusual sense, not, you're going to capitalize the first letter of every word. But right here in this example, for instance, they capitalize that entire first sentence, which you look at it and you kind of go, I don't, this is some work to read. It muddles things up. We're not quite used to reading all of these capital letters as consistently as the lowercase ones, so it takes a little more processing power in our brains to read, a little more tired. And plus, it kind of looks like someone's shouting at you. You don't like to be shouted at. I hope you don't like to shout at people. So typically, unless things are really, it's needed, you feel like it would benefit. For instance, at the bottom, they have danger. Danger would be fine, right? Danger is just a single word. You really want to emphasize the danger aspect to make people aware of how dangerous the procedure, whatever you're trying to explain is. So there are some instances where you can use it. Just don't use it liberally, right? You want to be pretty conservative with your capitalization in the middle of sentences and words. Okay, and one of the last things I'll say is you want to remember what your audience is, or how you analyze your audience and the purpose for which you are writing. We're actually going to get into this next lesson. I just wanted to outline it in when you are writing technical documents and you're formatting them and everything. You do want to make sure you are writing with a specific audience in mind, and then the purpose you are writing, whether you're trying to inform someone or persuade someone to do something in your writing, like a proposal, for instance. We'll go over this next lesson. I just wanted to touch base or touch down on this and kind of give you the information now. But you got to remember the different audiences and the different purposes you might have when constructing technical documents. All right, and that would be it. For this assignment, I would like you to practice technical writing a little bit. So what I have for you is I have a document, and when I open it, you will find 15 sentences. And these sentences are typical sentences, and a lot of them have fluff in it. A lot of them have information or are formatted in a certain way to where it's bloated. It's not efficient. It's not as effective as it can be. Just typical sentences. So what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go through each of these 15 questions or sentences and just write or do your best to rewrite the sentence in a way where it's more technically savvy, where you apply your technical writing knowledge and the sentence is much cleaner, right? So what you can do is you can make a copy, do a space, and you can do a sub letter like that, and then type out your new sentence or something like that. I'll let you be creative. You could even do something like, I believe that's not needed, so you can do a strike through, paragraph, text, and strike through. You can do something like that. That works too. Get rid of that. And then once you're done, I have like solutions, I guess you can say. There's not one correct way to write a sentence. It's up to you. It's just you want to write your technical writing sentences in a way that is efficient and effective, that is a lot easier for the reader to understand. There's no specific formula for how to do that. So what I have here in this doc is I have example solutions that I came up with that are examples. Again, yours do not have to be the same thing as this. Yours can be even better than these, right? It's just up to how you want to do it. So just turn that in, and that's going to be it. Okay? Thank you. See you next time.